Welcome to our studios at the Mass Communication Research Center in Jamia, Millia, Islamia. We are delighted to have with us today the Bengali filmmaker RITUPURNO GHOSH, and we're going to have a conversation with him. Many of you may already know that RITUPURNO is one of our most acclaimed filmmakers in India today. He has made a number of films, about almost 20 over 2 decades, and is also one of the filmmakers to have won the maximum number of national awards. We are very happy to have RITUPURNO GHOSH with us today. Welcome to our studios, RITUPURNO. We would like to talk about your work, and it's a huge body of work that you have. You started working, your film was released in 1994. I'm sure you started shooting before that.
I did my first feature, Hirirangti, before that, which never got released.
But it's now available in video.
In video.
But, you know, it's been almost 20 years that you've been making films?
Yes.
And exactly about 20 films that you have made? And so I thought that what we could do is probably start talking about the first 10 films that you have done, and then in the next episode talk about the second lot of films that you have done, which in many ways, as we will discuss, mark a different phase of your career. So if you could, if I could begin by asking that you have actually never been formally educated in filmmaking. We are sitting here in a film school, but you have actually not been through a school
ever.
You're a self-taught filmmaker.
And I haven't assisted any major
You have
director.
not assisted any major directors. So how did you learn the craft of filmmaking?
I was with advertising for 10 years before I started making films. And that's where the craft of filmmaking, I started getting acquainted with the craft of filmmaking. And there, it was particularly, and I was very fortunate to have been able to go through that phase, because that taught me the precision of communication, the 20-second precision and the detail, which in a way I was finding the resonance of which we are finding in Satyajit Ray's film. And if he has always been this unseen mentor to me. And watching his films, I wanted to become a filmmaker.
Did you ever meet him?
No. And he just passed away 7 days before my first film was censored.
Oh, so he never saw your film.
One of my greatest regret
is that he has not seen any of your films. No. But he has been a major influence, you say.
Absolutely.
So and how can you tell us a little bit about exactly what is it about Ray's films that have been an inspiration for you?
He was consistently making films in Bengali, except for Sadgati and a Shatranj. And this is a new kind of Bengaliness which was being celebrated in his films or came through us, and he was creating, giving new definition to the everyday mundane Bengaliness. And he only taught us, he is the trendsetter of the realistic filmmakers. Watching his films, I started understanding that film realism is not reality. Film has its own realism, where the Opu's eyes, when we first see Opu through this tattered kantha and just the eye, which comes back as a leitmotif when we see Aparna Sharmila Tagore's eyes peering out of the torn curtain. So these emphasis on what you want to see and what you want to show was a very important exercise. And in his films, all the disciplines, the various disciplines seem to mingle seamlessly.
Right.
Which was something attracted me. In others, I respected the other films, but they were not uniformly, Ray had got a rhythm and he would hold on to it for the rest of the film.
Right.
And that was very important to learn the rhythm of filmmaking.
And that came from Ray. And like you, he also was in advertising.
Yes.
You know, Shyam Benegal has also been in advertising. So a lot of our good filmmakers have actually started off their careers in advertising, and you know, then that helped them become
that helps because you are, I mean, as a job, you have to do multidisciplinary work.
You're saying that as a director?
As an advertising person, if
Oh,
you're in
I see.
creative,
Right.
you know how to illustrate an ad, whether photography or illustration in our times, and how much copy it needs to complement the visual. This whole copy, word and picture, forming the communication. You see it on print and start practicing on print.
Right.
And then it gives you a
So it's a good learning ground to, go into, if you did want to go into it and not stay with advertising. But how did 19 April, which actually translates, the translation of the title would be 19th April, which was your first film to be released. How did that idea come about? And I ask this also in the context that it's a story of two women, one played by Aparna Sen, who is also, one of Bengal's very known actresses. But also for many of us who watched it at that time, it was also the female protagonist coming back to the center stage of a cinematic narrative, which in the 80s we did not see very often, because the 80s Bengali cinema, primarily, except for the few films that Aparna Sen made, they were primarily
36
male.
and Poroma.
Yeah, 36 Choringilane and Poroma. They were primarily male-centric films. Whereas with your films, the female protagonist comes back to the center of the narrative. How did you think of this idea?
Actually, I owe it to Ray for the idea, for the very basic ideas. That was the time when telefilms were being commissioned by Doordarshan. That was the early days when Doordarshan was commissioning telefilms. And the whole viewing experiences of celluloid on television, that itself created a different interpretation or reading of the film.
Really?
I remember that the inspiration came from Jalshaghar. I was watching Jalshaghar on television.
Which is Satyajit Ray's film, The Music Room.
The Music Room.
Yeah.
The Music Room, this is the story of a decadent landlord and the huge mansion, and I found a very interesting thing. Earlier I noticed for the music, I watched it for the other things that it provided, but the first time I realized that there is a beautiful chemistry or a relation between the house and the man. And I wanted to do a similar film, and that small screen allowed me to do that intimate reading of Jalshaghar. And then I thought of a story where it could be a retired dancer and the house. That's how 19 April was, the idea came to me. As I thought I would approach the Doordarshan and NFDC for a co-production, and slowly this dancer and the house, then the daughter came into the picture, and eventually it became the daughter's story.
Yes.
But it has started somewhere else.
Right.
And when later on I heard that it was an imitation of Autumn Sonata, I couldn't explain because I haven't seen the film by then, and it created such a strong prejudice in me that even today I dare to see the film. Haven't watched Autumn Sonata till today, but the core idea was Jalshaghar, and I found it very convenient to turn it into a female protagonist, because I thought a lot of films have been made already. Even Ray, there was a certain kind of a male anxiety in his films, which, while he was creating Charulata and Mahanagar and creating these wonderful woman protagonists, sometimes the vulnerability of men was something that disturbed him. Men with bald head always became comic stereotypes in his film, and so I wanted to explore this domain with a woman. And after that film, a lot of mothers and lot of sisters, they were coming to me and telling me that how could you don't have a sister at home? How would you know the inner tension between a mother and a daughter? But I couldn't explain back that it can also be learnt through instincts and instinctive reading of relationships as depicted in other
and
films.
also you've had a very strong relationship with your
My mother.
Yes. At the time that you were making the film, I think you also had a strong relationship with Aparna Sen, who was the protagonist.
Yes.
So, you know, there are many ways in which you can actually imbibe and learn many of these social relationships. So, I guess what you're saying is that, you know, you're breaking away from a kind of an essentialism. So, if, you know, since we've also mentioned Aparna Sen, was she also an influence for you?
Not the filmmaker, but the person.
But not even 36 Chaurangi Lane and Poroma?
No, because they too were strong. I found echoes of Ray very strongly in those films. And Poroma to an extent differed from. I mean, the whole casting of Jennifer and Geoffrey Kendall in 36 Chaurangi Lane reminded me of Shakespeare Wala and the other films, the Ivory Merchant films. Poroma, when it came to this expression of woman, and that's where I thought she has got an idea somewhere, and it is different. It is different from Ray. Ray wouldn't have, I mean,
gone in that direction.
There are impressions of Ray, but that's where Aparna has started becoming an independent filmmaker.
You know, because when Unish April first released, and then we saw your second film also, and of course at that time I didn't know you, one of the things that we were definitely saying is that the kind of cinema that Aparna Sen had made possible, you know, that you had actually picked up that, not that idea, but that kind of legacy.
Possible.
And you were walking in that direction.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
So, you know, and very often it doesn't have to be that, you know, inspirations are not always very conscious, you know. So we don't know, you know, where we are imbibing it from. Now, you know, Unish April was a kind of an intimate drama in the house between the mother and the daughter. All kinds of resentments come into play and then, you know, resolve themselves. Dohon, on the other hand, was very much a film that was on the outdoors. You know, in the sense that not outdoors as in an action sort of a way, but the repercussions of what happens to a woman who is sexually assaulted on the streets. And the film kind of flows from that. And what is interesting is that what happens on the streets then has all these terrible consequences in the intimate sphere.
Absolutely.
What were you thinking when you were making that film?
In fact, that's the first time I was not doing a film in the Ray diktat.
Right.
It went out of this, because the structure of the film, it was just the structure. I mean, the raining evening, this couple were out shopping, and this girl was returning from the old home to where she has visited her grandmother, and then this molestation happens on the street and she saves her. It was a very linear depiction. Then one morning we were doing this, the molested woman's bedroom. We're supposed to shoot there. And I was sitting there and I looked at all her dressing table equipments were meant to be precious, which were borrowed from friends and people, have been removed. And the room looked a little exceptionally bare for being inhabited by people. And suddenly it struck me, has she left the room and gone away? She doesn't live here anymore. And that thought triggered off the letters. And I still find,
so if you can just explain a little bit who's writing these letters?
She's this girl who's molested is writing it to her sister.
Right.
And describing her new in-laws, the kind of, I mean, her first getting into the house, her excitement about it, and slowly when things are changing. So this format and the very important influence of Tagore of mentioning an address, the address becomes her identity. Like in Street Potru, letters,
the letter from the
wife, Makhunbara Lane becomes a very important identity.
That's right.
Here, this 9 Golf Club Road, the new address that this girl gains, and she eventually leaves and goes away from, was there. There was the influence of Tagore coming into it.
Did you make Ashok right after that, or
after that?
Right after that, which to my mind, Ashok, which can be translated as the illness or the ailment, to my mind is a very interesting film because again, while there is a woman at the center of the narrative, she is this well-known actress, who's just, whose relationship with her boyfriend has broken up, and her life is constantly under scrutiny because she's this public figure, and yet there is this internal turmoil that is, happening in her life. And around her, things happen, which is in her house, her mother falls ill. The father is also a very concerned father, is very anxious about the wife. And there is one moment in the film when the daughter thinks that the father may actually have infected the mother with AIDS.
Yes.
And it turns out later that that's a wrong suspicion. That does not happen. She has something else. But for a moment, here the doting...
living with that suspicion.
Living with that suspicion, the doting daughter who turns into, almost kind of has this hostility towards the father. Now, what is remarkable about the film is that, again, we have a very important woman protagonist, but the role of the father, played by Soumitra Chatterjee, most acclaimed for, being the hero in Satyajit Ray's films, has, to my mind, done one of his finest roles.
I also
and one of, the vulnerabilities of this man. So, for many people who say that, you are actually a woman's director, I would say that this is one of the best examples of how a man's vulnerability and has been handled so well on screen. So if you could tell us a little bit about the film.
I think it was Tagore. If Ray taught me discipline, Tagore taught me non-normativity. And his vast repertoire of work in various forms of literature, which provided windows to various kinds of forbidden imagination and happening in his own life, like a man who writes Noshtunir, which was later made into Charulata.
Yes.
And by almost penning down the short story, he made a rumor into a history. What was rumored in the house about his relationship with his elder sister-in-law became almost a historical evidence through his, and this is how, and it is written at the same time when he was writing Chokher Bali.
Right.
So he was dealing with both the non-normative relationships at the same time simultaneously, one with himself as the protagonist and the other with other characters. Now this is the whole thing of nobody, there can be good father, good parents, doting daughters, but there is this, that nobody is beyond, everything is possible, the possibility, including the possibility of everything can turn into something else, and it can never be finite. No identity is finite, no understanding is complete, it is ever changing. That is the first time, that was something Tagore taught me. And for the first time, which is why Ashok is very different from my earlier work, even technically and cinematically. Cinematically, it's very different.
And how would you see the difference? There is, but how do
there is much more interiority in the film.
That's right.
Which is going into this,
yes.
the mind of the daughter, raising questions. I have raised the questions using Tagore's poems.
Right. And the poems play a very important role in talking about the kind of dilemmas that she's facing. Yeah, and that's the first film in which you have very explicitly used Tagore, because in the film the woman's, it's almost like her closest companion is Rabindranath Tagore, the poet.
Is on the bedhead.
He's on the bedhead, and he's the one who's constantly counseling her, talking to her, and comforting her through this crisis.
And he is not the old, grey-haired, grey-bearded man. He is the young man.
The young Rabindranath.
Young Rabindranath on the bedhead. So almost her surrogate lover.
Or surrogate mentor, would you say?
Mentor or companion. I would rather
a friend.
Think of a friend or a companion.
Yes. A friend. Do you see Tagore like that in your life? Is he a friend?
Yes.
And how did you learn it?
I have a very difficult relationship with him.
You have a difficult relationship with him. In what way?
Sometimes, I mean, it is very normal for Bengalis to adore him, to respect him, to be reverent.
Yes.
But at the same time, I think he's much close to me for reverence only. Sometimes I react to his work, ideas in various ways, and as if I'm fighting with my own friend.
Yes.
And I'm learning in the process.
Yes, because if you're only reverential, then, I mean, you cannot critique, you cannot question, you cannot take it ahead. And in some ways, I think that Rai had that relationship with Tagore, that he, you know, he could actually pick up something and then do it in a non-reverential sort of way. You don't feel that?
I don't think so. I think the novelette, Noshtunir, and the novel Ghore Baire, they're far more radical than the films. Maybe this was his second film on Tagore,
yeah,
and he was making many changes, because Tagore's relationship with the Bengali audience in 1964, only after 23 years after his death, could not be so radical. So he was basically making films for, and we all forget, before Three Daughters, which were made on the centenary year, he had made Debi. Debi is the core of the idea comes from
Tagore, yeah,
and which is acknowledged in the beginning of the film.
Yes.
Though Prabhat Kumar Mukhopadhyay is the writer of the short story, the core idea came from Tagore.
And he was a little hesitant to make that film because he thought, as a Brahmo, he would be seen as somebody who's criticizing Hinduism, and therefore he thought that somebody who is a Hindu should actually write that story. I guess what I was saying, not irreverent, but to say that he was not afraid to play with, you know, in a creative way, because Noshtunir and Charulata are very different texts. Whereas a lot of filmmakers who came after that, they could not deviate or create out of Tagore because they were so beholden to the text. And that sense you do not get in Rai's films. And of course, you know, different generations of people will be influenced in different kinds of ways. After that, how did you think of a film like Bali Bali? Because now, you know, in all these films, of course, the women are very important. But for the first time in Bali Bali, we see you acting with an actress who's not from Bengal. You know, Kiran Kher is an actress from Bombay. How did you think of this film, and why did you cast her?
It was not a very natural choice. I wasn't finding a producer. NFDC was sitting on the script for a very long time, and I wanted to make it. Then Anupam came ahead.
Anupam Kher.
Anupam Kher,
who is an actor.
He's an actor who is the producer of Bali
Also
Bali.
the producer of.
And he almost implored me to try out Kiran in the main role. And the way Kiran was wanting, I mean, there's a famous quote by Tarkovsky that, I mean, actors don't have to have talent. It is the desire to perform. That makes good actors and bad actors. And I saw an immense desire to play that part
of Kiran
on
Kher.
Kiran Kher.
To do
And then we worked around the role, and she had a huge body. I was thinking of a much more vulnerable woman, much more dainty.
Because she's this landlady who lives in this big mansion all by herself, and things that happen in her life.
Brought in a new normativity of our conception of Bengali women. Bengali women always have to be demure and, you know, petite and gentle. And Kiran was a little robust for all this.
Yes.
And that's how, and her friendship with the maid, Malati. And there was a sense of these two women living in the house and enjoying a perfect coupling till the time the film crew arrives.
But the perfect coupling is also not always very nice, because they're constantly bickering and
fighting. And you know that they can't leave each other. They can't live without each other also.
Yeah.
That's also decided. And suddenly this whole thing comes in, and there comes in a regular...
The film crew comes in to shoot a film in the Haveli, yes.
And the director, the chemistry between director and Kiran Kher Bonalata falls into the regular pattern of romance or aspiration, and it breaks. And she stays back with the same household, with the same group of people, and her maid and the manservant.
You know, our first episode, will come to an end, and then we will continue the discussion in the next one. But I want to end with this one question for you, that you also introduced this whole idea of having a character being performed by several artists. So you could have, say, the body of one performer who's acting, and then the voice of another performer. So what is your take on that? Because a lot of people feel that, well, that's not quite right, and maybe it should always be the voice of the person who's playing, but you don't see it clearly like that.
No, because it's very important for us to learn and understand cinema, the technology, which allows me to get best of both and combine them to produce something else, which I choose an actor for the look, then I get a voice artist whose voice would go better and would do more justice to the character than the actor's voice. So I think basically acting, having come from the tradition of theatre, where it is the voice of the performer, the technology of cinema, which can blend these two voices and these two ingredients, and to produce a third component which becomes completely different from one another.
Yeah.
And there is the sense of identity is not strongly linked with that particular actor.
So there is an interesting overlap between the actor and the role, but the role is autonomous in the sense that it may have been created by more than one actor. Thank you very much, Ritu. We will continue this conversation in our next episode, and we will talk about the rest of your career. Thank you once again for coming to our studios.
Thank you.